Hey, how are you all? It's Mrs. Booth here. Great to see you here for another science lesson. And we're going to be delving a little bit more deeply into our rainforest ecosystems and looking at how producers and consumers interact and transfer energy. We looked at food chains in our last lesson, and today we're going to be looking at the more complex side of ecosystems and the food webs that are found there. So, to start with, I thought I'd start with one of the most powerful and dangerous predators in the Amazon. The Amazon is a rainforest, a tropical rainforest that is found in South America. There are rainforests across the world, but this is one of the most famous, and here is one of the deadliest and most dangerous predators. Anyone know what it is? You might think it's a crocodile or an alligator. It is definitely in the reptile class. Anyone know? It's called a black caiman. And a black caiman is one of the biggest and largest animals in the Amazon basin. That's where all the river is that goes through the rainforest. And it is known to eat any animal, and sometimes that includes humans. It is ferocious with its strong jaws, and it can be found along the riverbanks of the Amazon. I won't be wanting to put my toes in there. Today you're going to need your pencil or pen. You will certainly need a ruler to show all the energy transfer that's happening, and you'll need a paper or your workbook to work in. Pause the video if you need to go grab anything. So, our key vocabulary again is energy transfer, the movement of energy from one organism to another organism, and how that happens. Producer, organisms that create their own energy. Plants do this via photosynthesis. Primary consumer, the first organism that will eat plants or animals to get its own energy. Secondary consumer, the second animal that will eat an animal that has eaten a producer. And the last one, tertiary, which is the third consumer that eats other animals. So we looked at our food chain in our previous session. The leaf produced its own energy. The leafcutter ant ate the leaf, and energy is transferred from the leaf to the leafcutter ant. The leafcutter ant is eaten by the armadillo. The energy is transferred from the primary consumer into the armadillo. The armadillo is consumed by the cougar. That is the tertiary, the third consumer. And the energy is transferred from the armadillo into the cougar. But at the end of last session, we looked at the fact that actually food isn't quite so simple as this. And this is a linear, a straight line. And actually, in our ecosystems, things don't quite work the same. Things are very much a lot more complicated. So, ecosystem. You should be able to tell me now what an ecosystem. I do this. An ecosystem is a community or a group of plants, animals, habitats and microorganisms. We've been looking at the rainforest ecosystem, but you could be looking at a pond ecosystem or a grassland or a desert area or polar regions. We have lots of ecosystems, or the ocean, coral reef, ecosystems across the world. But remembering, these ecosystems are definitely not linear. You cannot just see one producer being eaten by one consumer. Consumers are everywhere, and the producers are everywhere. So how do scientists, biologists who study the world around them, show this more complex energy transfer? Well, they start to think about the organisms and how they're connected in a little bit more detail. They still start with the producer. The producer is the one that's first making the energy. It uses the light from the sun. So we have our grass. Rabbits is a primary consumer, but it is not the only animal that consumes our grass. Squirrels are also known for consuming grass. So now we have two primary consumers. The energy is transferred from the grass to the rabbit, and the energy is transferred from the grass to the squirrel. Now, what predators do squirrels and rabbits have? Well, the fox is a secondary consumer, and it will eat both the rabbit and the squirrel. So energy can be transferred either from a rabbit to the fox or from a squirrel to the fox. There are also other predators that may consume our primary consumers. We have got the badger. The badger will also eat rabbits and squirrels. Now, let's look at our tertiary, our third consumer, the bear. Bears will eat foxes. You wouldn't normally find a bear consuming a badger. It's not normally doesn't normally happen. So actually, at this moment, in our food web, the bear only consumes the fox. However, we have got a grey wolf as our tertiary consumer who sits quite high at the top of our food chain, and he will eat both badgers and foxes. So energy is transferred from our secondary consumers to our tertiary consumers, the grey wolf and the bear. Our web is definitely looking more complicated. It's not a straight line, and I'm sure you could think of other animals that would eat the grass, perhaps bugs that might be eaten by other animals, to make it even more complicated. It's much closer to what an ecosystem would actually look like. We call this a food web because our arrows and our energy transfer kind of cross in different places. So, I'm going to be asking you to draw a food web to show energy transfer between these rainforest organisms. You have got a banana tree, macaws, harpy eagle, a jaguar, an orchid, that beautiful flower, squirrel monkey, python, and a fruit bat. Have a look carefully at these animals, these organisms. What do you know about them? Can you group them, any of them straight away in your head with producers, consumers? Perhaps you know what class of animal they are, their diet. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide. The next slide is what you will need to be able to do your task. So you're going to find the producer, then you're going to find the herbivores, the animals that only eat plants, absolutely. Then you might look for omnivores or carnivores that might eat those herbivores. And finally, you're going to think about who would be at the top of your chain. Who is a carnivore that has few other predators? So you have all of your animals on the screen. I've also given you their diet, what they eat or how they produce their energy. So you will see a banana tree, photosynthesis. What did photosynthesis mean? Is the process of plants making their own energy. So you need to pause the video in a moment and just read through the whole of this table and start to think about what goes at the bottom of your food web and how each of these animals may be connected by using the table with all the information in it. There are steps there to follow. So I'd suggest that you pause the video now. How did it go? A little bit more brain mushing? It's a little bit tricky and it sometimes looks a little bit of a mess. Make sure you use your ruler or you've used your ruler to create your energy transfers. Shall we have a look to see how I have put it together? So here's our answer. Our producers, there were two producers in our set of organisms. There was the orchid, which was the flower, and there was the banana tree, which was also a producer. The orchid is consumed by the fruit bat and the macaws. Now on your food web you might have had these switched over. It doesn't matter which order they are, but you should have had energy transfer from the orchid going towards the fruit bat and towards the macaws. The banana tree also is consumed by the macaws, the fruit bat, and the squirrel monkey. The squirrel monkey does not consume the orchid. See our complicated web already beginning. These three animals are all primary consumers. They are eating the producers. They aren't eating other animals, they are eating the producers. Then we have the python. The python eats the fruit bat and the macaw. So the energy is transferred from the fruit bat into the python. The energy flows from the fruit bat to the python. And the python is our secondary consumer because we have had our producer and it's been consumed by the macaw, which has been consumed by the python. We are on our second consumer. Now, the python and the macaws can be consumed by the harpy eagle. So sometimes on our food webs, we can see where stages are skipped out. Harpy eagles, these predators, will sometimes eat the prey of macaws. They will sometimes eat them without having to eat the python. That skips a bit of your food chain. So it shows the more complicated, complex way the rainforest ecosystem works. Now, the jaguar also eats the macaws, and it also eats the squirrel monkey. The harpy eagle also eats the squirrel monkey. And here are our tertiary, our third consumers. Jaguars are not so fussy with their food. They will take whatever animal they can find. So sometimes skipping out that secondary consumer level. How did it go? Did yours look slightly the same? It might have been a little bit more complicated, but hopefully you have got your harpy eagle and jaguar at the top of your food web, and underneath your producers are the orchid and the banana tree. Great job. It definitely isn't the easiest thing to draw. So, what would happen, do you think, if I said there were no more banana trees? How would that impact and change our food web? Have a think. Would there be less food for the squirrel monkeys and the fruit bats? Perhaps it would mean there would be less food for our tertiary consumers, and it would change our whole rainforest ecosystem because there would be animals which were lacking some of their diet, and it would mean that perhaps some would die off. And that could be from our primary consumers all the way up to our tertiary consumers. A change in those producers, a change in that one element of our web will rock a whole ecosystem and change it. And most of the time, not for the better. We're going to be looking at that a little bit more detail in our next lesson, thinking about the impact of changes to our ecosystem. So, energy transfer goes from the producer to the consumer. The producer creates its own energy with sunlight. The primary consumer is the first animal that eats the producer. Then we have a secondary consumer. And finally, we have our tertiary consumer, the third animal. And we have a much more complicated and realistic look at how ecosystems work together. So, looking forward to talking to you soon about impacts and change on the ecosystem, especially the rainforest ecosystem. See you all soon. Goodbye.